The auctioneer's hammer cracked down like a gunshot, and Arthur Weston's hand shot into the air before his mind had caught up with what his mouth was about to do. 200 silver, he called out, and the crowd gathered on the frost-slick stones of Cordon's Pass Market turned as one to stare at him. He had not meant a bid at all. He had come to the mountain monastery market for dried yarrow and mountain sage, for the small trades a wandering herbalist made to keep himself in bandages and boots. He had not meant to be standing here, in the shadow of the ancient stone bell tower that marked the head of the pass, watching a war band of hunters drag a bound orc woman up onto the auction block like she was livestock. But then he had seen her eyes. She was on her knees on the wooden platform, wrists lashed behind her back with barbed cord that had already drawn blood, and still she knelt like a queen forced to bow, spine straight, chin lifted, green eyes burning with a fury so pure it made the merchants nearby take a half step back. Tusks, small and sharp and white, pressed against her lower lip. Her dark hair was matted with dried blood at the temple, and someone had dressed her in a torn burlap sack meant to humiliate her. But even that could not hide the coiled strength in her shoulders, the raw power banked and waiting in every line of her body. She was, Arthur thought with the strange clarity of a man about to do something monumentally foolish, the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. 200 silver, the auctioneer repeated, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous laugh, from the herb man. Do I hear 250? A broad-shouldered hunter near the front, his beard braided with iron rings, the mark of the Asheville warband burned into his leather vest, sneered and raised 2 fingers. 300. She is a prize of war, boy, not some pass-market trinket. General Voss wants his stolen prize returned, and he will pay well for the privilege of skinning the man who thinks he can outbid the Asheville. Arthur's stomach dropped. He had exactly 230 silver to his name, sewn into the lining of his herb satchel, saved over 3 years of walking these mountain roads treating frostbite and broken bones, and the aches of old soldiers who paid him in coin when they had it, and in stories when they did not. He looked at the orc woman on the block. She was looking back at him now, and there was no gratitude in her gaze, only a fierce, wary calculation, as if she were trying to decide whether he was a fool or a liar or both. "I am not bidding to buy her," Arthur said, loud enough for the crowd, for the monks watching grim-faced from the monastery steps, for the hunters with their iron-ringed beards. "I am bidding because she is spoken for. She is my intended bride." The words came out of him before he had fully formed the plan behind them, but once spoken they could not be unspoken, and he watched them land on the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. The bearded hunter barked a laugh. "Your bride, the healer's orc bride, that is a fine tale, little man. Tell it to General Voss when he comes to collect his property." "She is under contract of courtship," Arthur said, and now his voice was steadier because he had found, somewhere in the panic of the last 10 seconds, the shape of a lie sturdy enough to stand on. "Sealed before the monastery elders 3 days past. You cannot sell a woman who is already promised. It is against the pass law, and you know it, or you would not still be standing here arguing instead of dragging her off your own account." That was true, at least. The old law of Cordon's Pass, older than the war between men and orcs, held that no person under formal courtship contract could be sold at market, not even a war prize. It was a law meant to protect merchant daughters from being auctioned off by debt collectors. But Arthur had read enough of the monastery's dusty law scrolls in his years passing through to know it applied to anyone standing on that stone. The auctioneer, sensing an opportunity to avoid a fight he clearly wanted no part of, seized on it. "The pass law is the pass law," he said quickly. "If the healer has papers, the sale cannot proceed until the elders rule on it." "I have no papers," Arthur admitted, because there was no use in a lie so easily disproven, "but I can present myself before the elders this very hour and swear the courtship on my own honor. That is all the pass law requires, a sworn word before witnesses." The bearded hunter's face went dark with fury, But the crowd was murmuring now, and two of the monastery monks were already descending the steps, drawn by the promise of a dispute they had the authority to settle. Arthur felt his heart hammering against his ribs hard enough to hurt. The orc woman on the block had not moved, but her eyes had narrowed, studying him with an intensity that felt like being pinned beneath a hawk's shadow. "You would swear a courtship oath," she said, and her voice was low and rough and carried easily across the square, "to a woman you have never spoken to. To save your own coin, human, or to save your own skin from the ashville, more like." "I would swear it," Arthur said, meeting her gaze, "because no person deserves to be sold like a sack of grain, and because I have 230 silver and a great deal more courage than sense, apparently. Take your pick of reasons. We can argue about which one is true after they cut you loose." Something flickered behind her eyes. Not gratitude, something sharper. Interest, maybe, or the particular respect one dangerous creature gives another when it recognizes a fellow gambler. "Elder Bram," called one of the monks, an older woman with a shaved head and the Sun End Mountain tattoo of the monastery order across her brow, "will hear the courtship claim in the sanctuary hall. Bring the woman, bring the man. The Asheville hunters will state their claim as well, and the elder will rule before sundown." The bearded hunter spat on the stones but did not argue further. Even warbands did not lightly cross the monastery elders, whose neutral ground at the head of the pass was respected by human kingdoms and orc clans alike, the one place in 100 miles where either side could trade without drawing steel. He gestured sharply, and two of his men hauled the orc woman off the block by her bound arms, none too gently, and Arthur had to bite down hard on the urge to shove them away from her, because that would help nothing, and he was already standing on ground thin enough to crack. They walked her toward the sanctuary hall, and Arthur fell into step beside her, close enough that he could see the tension coiled through every muscle in her body, the way she was measuring the distance to the tree line, the height of the wall, the number of armed men between herself and freedom. "Do not run," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Not yet. If you run now, they will put an arrow in your back before you clear the square, and even if you escape, they will hunt you through the pass with dogs. Let me speak to the elder first. Give me that much." She turned her head and looked at him, close enough now that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the fine white scar that crossed her jaw, the sheer size of her compared to him, a full head taller, even bound and bent from days of captivity. "Why," she said, "would you spend 200 silver and your own neck on a stranger herb man?" "Arthur," he said, "my name is Arthur Weston, and I do not know why. Ask me again after we are both still alive tonight, and I will try to have a better answer." A sound escaped her that might, in a kinder world, have been called a laugh. "Lash," she said, "Lash Strongtusk, and if you get me killed with this foolish lie of yours, human, I will find a way to haunt you for the rest of your short, foolish life." "Noted," Arthur said, and despite everything, despite the hunters at their backs and the elder waiting to judge a lie he had invented in the space of a single breath, he felt something in his chest crack open like a window thrown wide after a long winter. The sanctuary hall was carved directly into the mountain's shoulder. Its walls hung with faded tapestries depicting the old treaty between the first human settlers and the orc clans who had once ruled these peaks alone. A treaty broken and remade and broken again more times than anyone could count. Elder Bram was a heavy-set man with a beard the color of old snow and eyes that missed nothing, and he listened to the bearded Asheville hunter's furious claim of stolen war property with visible patience before turning his attention to Arthur. "You claim a courtship contract," Elder Bram said. "Sworn before witnesses, you said outside. Which witnesses, healer?" "I do not recall marrying anyone in my sanctuary these past 3 days, and I recall a great deal, being the only elder currently residing at this monastery." Arthur's mouth went dry. He had known this moment would come, had known the moment he opened his mouth in the square that the lie would need feeding, layer upon layer, or it would collapse and take them both down with it. There was no formal ceremony yet, Elder, Arthur said carefully. Only a private vow between the two of us, sworn 3 nights passed at the herbalist's camp below the North Ridge, before we knew the Asheville warband was in pursuit. We intended to seek your blessing properly, once matters had settled, but circumstance did not permit us the courtesy of announcing it beforehand. It was, Arthur reflected with something like despair, a spectacularly bad lie, full of holes large enough to march an army through. But Elder Bram's gaze had shifted to Lash, and something in his expression had softened, just slightly, the way a man's face softens when he wants very badly to believe a comforting story. "Is this true?" Elder Bram asked her. "Orc woman, did you swear a private vow to this man?" Lash Strongtusk did not answer immediately. Arthur watched her weigh the lie in her mind the way she had weighed the distance to the tree line minutes before, watched the calculation move behind her eyes, and he understood in that moment that whatever she said next would decide both their fates, and there was nothing more he could do to influence it. He had gambled everything on a stranger's willingness to lie for her own freedom, and now he simply had to wait. "It is true," Lash said, and her voice did not waver. "I swore it. The healer tended a wound on my arm 3 nights past, when I had escaped the Asheville camp and lay bleeding in the rocks below the ridge. He did not turn me over for the bounty, though he must have known what I was worth. We spoke through the night, and by morning I told him I would have no other man as my husband, human or otherwise, for I had never met one with such foolish courage. It was, Arthur thought distantly, a far better lie than his own, delivered with such flat conviction that even he almost believed it had happened." Elder Bram studied them both for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable, and then he turned to the Asheville hunter with an expression that had hardened into something final. "The pass law is clear," he said. "A person under sworn courtship, even an informal vow witnessed only by the parties themselves, cannot be sold at this market, nor claimed as property by any third party, until the courtship is either formalized or broken. If the Asheville warband wishes to challenge General Voss's claim to this woman, they may take that dispute to the clan councils. It is not a matter for this market, nor for me. The woman is released into the healer's custody, pending the formal marriage rite, which I expect to see completed within the season, or I will hear this claim again with considerably less patience." The bearded hunter's face twisted with fury, but he did not argue with an elder on neutral ground, not with the monastery's own armed guards watching from the walls. He spat again, closer to Arthur's boots this time, and jerked his head at his men. "This is not finished," he said. "General Voss does not forget what is owed him. We will be watching the pass, healer. Enjoy your stolen bride while you can." They filed out, and Arthur let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, his knees suddenly unsteady beneath him. Elder Bram cut the barbed cord from Lash's wrists himself, his expression grim as he saw the raw wounds beneath. "Get her tended," he said to Arthur, "and get her out of the market square before the Asheville decide the clan councils are too slow for their taste. I have kept the peace on this ground for 30 years, and I do not intend to let it break over one stolen war prize, no matter how much sympathy I hold for her circumstance. Formalize the marriage, healer, or dissolve the courtship properly before witnesses. Do not leave this a lie hanging over my mountain." "Yes, Elder," Arthur said, and did not mention that formalizing a marriage to a woman he had known for less than an hour presented certain practical difficulties. Outside the sanctuary hall, in the thin, cold light of late afternoon, with the wind cutting down off the high passes and carrying the smell of wood smoke and pine, Lash Strongtusk turned to face him, rubbing her raw wrists, and for the first time he saw her fully upright and unbound, and the sight of her stole something from his chest he was not sure he would get back. She was tall, taller than most men, with the broad, powerful shoulders of a warrior and a waist that curved sharply beneath them, her burlap sack dress doing nothing to disguise the strength coiled through her frame. Even bruised and filthy from days of captivity, there was a raw, dangerous beauty to her, in the sharp planes of her face, the proud tusks, the fierce intelligence burning behind her green eyes. "Well," she said, crossing her arms beneath her breasts and regarding him the way a wolf might regard a rabbit that had, against all odds, offered it dinner instead of running. "It seems, Herb-man, that you have made me your wife." "It seems I have," Arthur agreed weakly. "For the moment, anyway." It was the only lie I could think of fast enough. "It was a terrible lie," Lash said, "full of holes. The elder believed it only because he wished to." "Yours was better," Arthur admitted. Something about a wound and a night of foolish courage. A ghost of a smile touched her mouth, gone almost before he saw it. "I have some skill with stories," she said. "It comes from years of talking my way out of clan punishments as a girl. But we are not out of danger, human. The Asheville will not forget this, and General Voss does not lose what he considers his property without pursuit. We have bought time, nothing more." "Then let us use it well," Arthur said, and offered her his arm, an absurd gesture given the circumstances. But she looked at it for a long moment before, to his surprise, she took it, her large hand closing around his forearm with a grip that could have crushed stone but did not. "Come, husband," she said, and there was something dry and dangerous in the word that made his pulse jump. "Show me where you have made camp, and tell me exactly how a wandering herb-man came to be reckless enough to buy a war prize's freedom with a lie and 200 silver." They walked together through the market square, past stalls selling dried meats and woven blankets, and the small iron trinkets the mountain smiths were known for, past the watchful, curious eyes of merchants and pilgrims who had witnessed the whole strange scene, and Arthur was acutely aware of how it must look. This small, unremarkable herbalist walking arm in arm with a war-prize orc woman twice his width and strength, and he found, strangely, that he did not care what any of them thought. His camp was a modest one, set up in a sheltered hollow just below the monastery walls where he had permission to pitch his canvas tent for a few silver a week, close enough to the market to trade but far enough from the main road to avoid unwanted attention. A small fire pit, a bedroll, his satchel of herbs and bandages, a cooking pot, and a mule named Bartholomew who regarded Lash's approach with the deep suspicion mules reserved for anything larger than themselves. "This is your home," Lash said, looking around with an expression that mixed skepticism with something almost like amusement. "A tent and a mule." "I travel light," Arthur said. "It is easier to help people when you are not weighed down by possessions. Sit, please. Let me see to your wounds properly, the ones the cord left, and that cut on your temple. It looks deeper than it should be left untreated." She sat, somewhat stiffly, on the log he used as a bench near the fire, watching him with wary eyes as he retrieved clean linen and a small clay jar of salve from his satchel. "Why," she said again, as he knelt before her and gently took her wrist to examine the raw skin, "did you do this? You risked your life, your coin, your reputation before that market crowd, for a woman you had never met." Arthur considered the question seriously as he worked, cleaning the wounds with careful, practiced hands, aware of the tension in her muscles, the way she watched his every movement like a creature unused to being touched without violence. "I have spent 3 years walking these mountain roads," he said slowly, "healing whoever needed healing. Soldiers, merchants, farmers, once even an Asheville scout who had broken his leg and would have died in the rocks if I had not found him first. I have seen a great deal of cruelty in that time, and a great deal of suffering that could have been prevented if people simply chose to be kind when kindness cost them nothing. But standing there in that square, watching them sell you like livestock, kindness would have cost me everything, and I found I did not care. I could not stand by and watch it happen when I had the means, however foolish, to stop it." "That is either the noblest thing I have ever heard," Lash said, "or the stupidest." "Probably both," Arthur said, and was rewarded with that ghost of a smile again, lingering a moment longer this time. He finished cleaning the wound at her temple, his fingers gentle against her skin, and became abruptly aware of how close they were. her green eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made his chest tight, her breath warm against his knuckles. "You have gentle hands, Herb Man," she said quietly. "Occupational necessity," Arthur said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "It is difficult to heal someone if you are also hurting them." Lash said, and did not pull away, though several long seconds passed where neither of them moved, the fire crackling beside them, the mountain wind hissing through the pines above, and Arthur found himself wondering what her mouth would taste like before he caught himself and pulled back, clearing his throat. "You should eat," he said, standing quickly and busying himself with the cooking pot. "You have not had a proper meal in days, I would guess, from how thin your face has gone." "You would guess correctly," Lash said, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "The Asheville are not known for their hospitality toward captives." As he prepared a simple stew of dried meat and root vegetables, she told him, in short, clipped sentences that gave away more emotion than she perhaps intended, how she had been taken. She was a warrior of the Ironville clan, a border clan that had signed an uneasy peace with the nearby human kingdom of Aldrich 3 years past, a peace that General Voss of the Asheville War Band considered a betrayal of Orc pride. Voss had raided the Ironville border settlements not to conquer but to punish, and Lash, defending her clan's outer watch post, had been overwhelmed and taken alive specifically because Voss knew her lineage, knew she was kin to the Ironville clan chief, and intended to sell her at the Pass Market as a public humiliation, a message to any clan that dared make peace with humans that their own blood was not safe. "They meant to break my clan's pride through me," she said, staring into the fire, her jaw tight. "I would have died first, but they did not give me that choice. They kept me alive, bound, paraded through 3 market towns before this one, so that word would spread. Ironville's own daughter sold like cattle. That is not going to happen," Arthur said quietly, ladling stew into a wooden bowl and passing it to her. "Not while I have breath in me." "You cannot promise that," Lash said, though something in her voice had softened. "No," Arthur agreed. "But I can try, and trying is generally the only thing worth doing when the alternative is standing by and doing nothing." They ate in comfortable silence as the sun sank behind the peaks and the temperature dropped sharply, the way it always did in the high passes once darkness came. Arthur added wood to the fire and offered Lash one of his 2 blankets, which she accepted with a small, surprised nod, as though she had expected him to keep both for himself. "Tomorrow," she said, wrapping the blanket around her broad shoulders, "we must decide what to do. The Asheville will not simply forget this insult. General Voss has men watching every road out of this pass by now, I would wager, and your foolish courtship lie has bought us weeks at most before the elder demands we make it real or dissolve it before witnesses." "Then I suppose," Arthur said, settling onto his own bedroll a respectful distance away, though he found himself wishing it were closer, "we had better decide which it is going to be. But not tonight. Tonight you should rest, Lash Strongtusk. You have earned it." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire, and then she said, so softly he almost missed it over the crackle of the flames, "Thank you, Arthur Weston. Whatever comes of this madness, I will not forget what you did today." "Get some sleep," he said, his throat tight. "We will figure out the rest tomorrow." They did not figure it out the next day, nor the day after that. The days that followed fell into a strange, charged rhythm neither of them had planned for. Arthur continued his trade at the market, selling herbs and treating minor injuries, while Lash, still recovering her strength, helped him gather supplies from the high meadows above the monastery, moving through the rocky terrain with a grace that took his breath away, and he found himself watching her far more than the plants he was supposed to be harvesting. They quarreled, too, often and easily, over everything from how he organized his herb satchel, which she declared was chaos disguised as a system, to whether orc fighting techniques or human sword forms were superior, an argument that ended with her disarming him with a stick in under 4 seconds and looking entirely too pleased with herself about it. "You fight like a man who has never truly needed to," she said, tossing his practice stick back to him as he picked himself up from the dirt, brushing pine needles from his tunic with wounded dignity. "I fight like a man who solves most of his problems with herbs and conversation," Arthur said. "It has served me well enough." "It will not serve you when the Asheville come," Lash said, though there was no real cruelty in it, only a fierce, protective worry that she seemed almost embarrassed to have revealed. "You should let me teach you something useful. Is that concern I hear, Lash Strongtusk?" "It is practicality," she said, tusks flashing as she scowled at him, though a flush had crept into her cheeks that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. "A dead husband is an inconvenient husband." "Ah," Arthur said, grinning despite the ache in his ribs, "so I am your husband now and not merely a convenient lie. Do not push your luck, herb man." But she taught him anyway, patient in a way that surprised him, correcting his stance, showing him how to use his smaller size and quicker reflexes against a larger opponent. And there were moments, her hands adjusting his grip on the practice stick, her body pressed close behind his to demonstrate a stance, when the pretense between them seemed to blur into something neither of them had a name for yet. It was on one such evening, 3 weeks into their strange arrangement, that the rivalry finally broke. They had been arguing again, this time about whether Arthur's constant kindness toward strangers was wisdom or weakness, Lash insisting that a man who healed anyone who asked, friend or potential enemy, was a man who would eventually be killed by his own generosity, and Arthur arguing that a world with less cruelty in it was worth the risk. "You would heal an Asheville scout with a broken leg," she said, her voice rising with genuine frustration as they stood near the fire. "The very men hunting me and call it mercy. It is not mercy, Arthur. It is recklessness." "It is the same recklessness that made me bid on you at that auction," Arthur shot back, closer to her now than he had realized, close enough to see the gold flecks in her furious green eyes. "Was that weakness too, Lash?" "That was different," she said, but her voice had lost its heat, gone rough instead, and she had not stepped back from him. "How was it different?" "Because I did not want you to stop," she said, and then, as if the words had surprised her as much as him, she closed the last distance between them and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was fierce and hungry and full of 3 weeks of banked tension finally breaking loose, her hands fisting in the front of his tunic to pull him closer, her mouth hard against his. And Arthur made a low sound of surprise before his arms came around her, one hand rising to cup her jaw, and he kissed her back with everything he had been holding in check since the moment he first saw her kneeling on that auction block. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lash stared at him with something like shock on her own face, as though she had not fully intended to do that any more than he had. "That," she said, "was a mistake." "Was it?" Arthur asked, his voice unsteady. "Yes," Lash said, and kissed him again to prove it, or perhaps to disprove it, and Arthur found he did not particularly care which as long as she kept doing it. They did not speak of what it meant, not that night, but something had shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that the lie they had built to save her life had grown roots into something neither of them had planned for and neither of them, if pressed, would have wanted to uproot. The following weeks brought both tenderness and danger in equal measure. Word reached the monastery market that Asheville scouts had been spotted on the lower trails, watching the roads leading away from the pass, and Elder Bram, true to his word, began pressing Arthur about the state of the courtship with increasing frequency, his patience visibly thinning. "The season turns soon, healer," he said one gray morning, finding Arthur at his herb stall. "I gave you until the season's end to formalize this marriage or dissolve it. I have kept the Asheville from tearing this market apart on the strength of my own word, and my word is not infinite. Choose, and choose soon." Arthur found Lash later that day, practicing forms alone in the meadow above the monastery, her borrowed leathers, procured from a sympathetic monastery quartermaster to replace the humiliating burlap sack, fitted close to her powerful frame, dark travel leathers laced snugly at her sides, emphasizing the strength and curve of her. A long knife at her hip that she had earned back through sheer force of will and reputation among the market traders who had come to respect her in the weeks since her arrival. "Elder Bram is losing patience," Arthur told her, watching her move through the forms with lethal grace. "He wants an answer, marriage or dissolution, before the season ends." Lash stopped mid-motion, breathing hard, and turned to face him, something guarded settling over her features. "And what answer will you give him?" "That depends," Arthur said carefully, "on what you want, Lash. This started as a lie to save your life. I will not trap you in it if it is not what you truly want. If you wish to return to your clan once the Asheville threat is dealt with, I will tell the elder the courtship is dissolved, and no one will think less of you for it." "And if I do not wish to return," Lash said slowly, closing the distance between them, "and do not wish the courtship dissolved?" Arthur's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Then I would ask you properly," he said, "instead of lying to an elder about a private vow that never happened. I would ask you if you would truly have me, Lash Strongtusk, not as a shield against the Asheville, but as a husband." She studied him for a long moment, the mountain wind stirring her dark hair, and then she reached out and took his hand, turning it over to examine his palm, the calluses earned from years of gathering herbs and setting bones, so different from her own warrior's hands. "I have known you 6 weeks," she said. "I have watched you heal strangers who spat at you for your kindness. I have watched you stand between me and men who could have killed you without effort and not flinch. I have never in my life met a man with so little power who wielded such enormous courage. I would be a fool to let a lie become the only reason I stayed with you, Arthur Weston. So let this be truth instead. Ask me properly, and I will answer properly." His breath caught. He had not planned this moment, had not prepared words worthy of it, but standing in that windswept meadow with her hand in his, he found the words did not need to be prepared at all. "Lash Strongtusk," he said, "will you marry me?" Not to satisfy an elder's law, not to escape the Asheville, but because these 6 weeks have been the finest of my entire life, and I do not wish to spend a single day after this one without you in it. "Yes," Lash said, without hesitation, and kissed him hard enough to steal the breath from his lungs, and this time neither of them pulled back to call it a mistake. That night, wrapped together beneath the shared warmth of their blankets near the dying fire, the pretense finally, fully fallen away, Arthur told her he wanted to give her something real for the marriage, something that was not borrowed or bought but made, and Lash, tracing idle patterns against his chest with one large finger, asked what an herb man could possibly forge that would suit a warrior. "I am not without other skills," Arthur said, smiling into her hair. "Give me 3 days." He spent those 3 days at the monastery's small forge, borrowing tools from the aging blacksmith monk who tended it, working in stolen hours between his healing trade, using the only iron he had readily available and could bear to part with. A handful of old iron nails pulled from a broken cart wheel he had traded for scrap the previous season. He melted them down with painstaking care, hammered and shaped and filed the metal by candlelight long after Lash had gone to sleep. His hands, more accustomed to grinding herbs than working iron, blistering and burning in the process, until finally on the 3rd night he held a plain, simple band of dark iron, rough-hewn but solid, warm from his own labor. It was not beautiful, not by the standards of the gold and silver rings the merchant caravans sold in the lowland cities. It was iron, plain and unadorned, bearing the faint hammer marks of an amateur's hand, but Arthur had never made anything with more care in his life. He found Lash at dawn, sharpening her knife on a whetstone outside their tent, and knelt before her, presenting the ring on his open palm. "I could not afford gold," he said, "and even if I could, I do not think gold would suit you half so well as something forged with my own hands. This was iron nails once, holding together a broken cart wheel. I melted them down and made this instead. It is not much to look at, Lash, but I made it for you, and it will not break easily. I thought that fitting for us." Lash Strongtusk, warrior of the Ironville clan, who had faced down Asheville raiders without flinching, who had knelt on an auction block with fire in her eyes rather than break, looked at the crude iron band in Arthur's palm and found, to her own visible astonishment, that her eyes had filled with tears. "It is the finest thing anyone has ever given me," she said, her voice rough, and held out her hand. He slid the iron band onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, snug and solid against her skin, and she stared at it for a long moment before pulling him up into a kiss so fierce and so full of feeling that he nearly lost his balance and toppled them both into the dirt. Elder Bram married them 3 days later, a simple ceremony in the sanctuary hall before a handful of witnesses, monastery monks and a few of the market traders who had grown fond of the strange pair over the weeks. And when Elder Bram asked if there was any objection to the union, the doors of the sanctuary hall crashed open, and General Voss of the Asheville Warband strode in with a dozen armed men at his back. He was a mountain of an orc, older than Lash by 2 decades, his face a roadmap of old scars, a warhammer slung across his back, and his eyes found Lash instantly, burning with a possessive fury that made Arthur's blood run cold. "This ceremony is a farce," Voss announced, his voice booming off the stone walls. "This woman is a prize of war, taken in a righteous raid against the Ironville traders who bent their knee to human peace. She belongs to me by right of conquest, and no pass-market lie about courtship will change that." Elder Bram stepped forward, his face hard. "General Voss, this is neutral ground. You have no authority to interrupt a sanctioned marriage right within these walls." "I have the authority of 100 warriors camped at the base of this mountain," Voss said, "and I have grown tired of waiting for the clan councils to rule on a matter I can settle myself, right now, in this room." He drew a curved blade from his belt, the metal singing as it left the sheath. "Give her to me, Elder, or watch this sanctuary burn." The witnesses scrambled back from the aisle, and Arthur felt Lash tense beside him, her hand already moving toward the knife at her hip. But Arthur stepped forward instead, placing himself between her and General Voss, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. "No," Arthur said, and his voice, to his own surprise, did not shake. Voss's cold eyes flicked to him with something like amused contempt. "Move aside, little man, before I remove you from my path." "No," Arthur said again, louder, and the entire sanctuary hall went silent. "I have stood by while men bought and sold human lives and orc lives alike on that market square outside, and I told myself it was not my fight, that I could only do so much good with the little power I have. But this is my wife, General Voss, sworn before this elder and these witnesses, and I will not stand silently by while you drag her from this sanctuary. If you want her, you will have to go through me first, and I promise you, I will make it as difficult and as loud as I possibly can." "Arthur," Lash breathed, but he did not step back, and something in his stillness, in the sheer unwavering refusal in his voice, seemed to unbalance even General Voss for a moment. "You would die for her," Voss said, not quite a question. "I would," Arthur said, "gladly. But I would rather live for her if it is all the same to you, so I suggest you reconsider what you are about to do in front of an elder and a dozen witnesses on ground your own people helped establish as neutral 3 generations ago. Kill an unarmed healer in a sanctuary hall, General, and see how quickly every clan council in these mountains turns against the Asheville for breaking a peace older than your grandfather's grandfather." The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring, and then, from the back of the hall, one of the monastery's armed guards spoke up, his hand resting meaningfully on his own sword hilt. "The healer speaks the law true, General. Draw blood in this hall and you will answer to every clan and kingdom that respects this ground. Is one stolen war prize worth that price?" Voss's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring visibly across his scarred face. And for a long, terrible moment Arthur thought the general would simply cut him down anyway and deal with the consequences later. But then Lash stepped up beside Arthur, her hand closing around his, the crude iron band catching the torchlight, and she spoke for the first time since Voss had entered. "You want to humiliate my clan through me, General," she said, her voice carrying clear and steady through the hall. "Kill me here in a sanctuary, breaking a peace 3 generations old, and you will not humiliate the Ironville. You will hand them a martyr and unite every clan on this mountain against the Asheville for the insult. Is your pride worth destroying your own war bands, standing among every clan council from here to the eastern peaks?" Voss stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, the fury banking into something colder and more calculating. "This is not finished, Ironville," he said finally, sheathing his blade with a violence that made several witnesses flinch. "I will bring this before the clan councils properly, as the elder demands, and we will see whose claim holds. But mark me, girl, when the councils rule in my favor, and they will, I will not show you or your human husband the mercy of a quick ending." He turned and stormed from the hall, his men filing out behind him, and the moment the heavy doors swung shut, the sanctuary erupted into noise, witnesses exclaiming, Elder Bram shouting for calm, and Arthur, his knees suddenly weak now that the danger had passed, turned to find Lash staring at him with an expression he had never seen on her before, something raw and stripped bare of all her usual guarded fierceness. "You stood in front of a warhammer for me," she said. "You are either the bravest man I have ever known or the greatest fool, and I have stopped being able to tell the difference. Can it not be both?" Arthur asked, and she laughed, a startled, genuine sound, before pulling him into a kiss that tasted of relief and fear and something fiercer than either. Elder Bram, once order was restored, finished the ceremony with visible haste, as though eager to have the matter legally settled before Voss reconsidered his restraint, and by the time the sun set that evening, Arthur Weston and Lash Strongtusk were, in every way that mattered, truly and legally wed, the iron band on her finger no longer a symbol of a convenient lie, but a promise both of them intended to keep for the rest of their lives. But General Voss's threat did not fade with the sunset. Word came within days, carried by a nervous market trader who had overheard Asheville scouts discussing it near the lower trading post, that Voss had indeed brought his claim before the nearest clan council, a gathering of orc elders from 3 neighboring clans who held sway over disputes exactly like this one, and that the council would convene within the fortnight at a neutral gathering ground 2 days' ride from the monastery market. To rule once, and for all on whether Lash Strongtusk belonged to the Asheville as spoils of war or to herself, and her chosen husband as a free woman. "This is not merely a formality," Lash told Arthur grimly, as they packed provisions for the journey in the gray light before dawn. "The clan councils hold real power. If they rule in Voss's favor, no pass law or monastery elder can protect me. I will be dragged back to the Asheville camp in chains, and you, Arthur, will likely be killed for having interfered in clan property to begin with." "Then we had better make certain they rule the right way," Arthur said, tightening the straps on Bartholomew's pack with hands that betrayed only a slight tremor. "It is not so simple," Lash said. "The council favors strength and clans standing above all else. Voss will bring warriors to testify to my clan's weakness in bending to human peace. He will paint the Ironville as traitors deserving punishment, and he will paint you as an opportunist who stole clan property through a market technicality. We need more than words, Arthur. We need proof that this marriage is real, that I am not merely hiding behind a human's coattails to escape rightful capture." Arthur considered this as they finished loading the mule, watching the sun crest the eastern peaks and spill golden light across the frost-rimed grass. What kind of proof would satisfy an orc clan council? Lash's expression turned thoughtful, then, slowly, something almost like a fierce smile. "There is an old custom," she said, "rarely used anymore, but the elders would recognize it, a challenge bond. If I fight and win a challenge before the council, defending my choice of husband against any who contest it, The council is bound by ancient law to recognize the marriage as legitimate, regardless of clan politics. It is a warrior's proof, older than any written treaty. And if you lose—" "I will not lose," Lash said, with such flat certainty that Arthur almost believed the matter settled entirely on will alone. "But if the council permits Voss himself to stand as challenger, it will not be an easy fight. He has 30 years of battle experience beyond mine, and a warhammer that has ended more lives than I can count." "Then we find another way," Arthur said immediately, fear spiking cold through his chest at the thought of Lash facing that warhammer in single combat. "There must be another proof, something that does not require you to risk your life against a man twice your size and experience." Lash reached out and cupped his face in her large, calloused hand, her green eyes soft despite the grim topic. "Arthur, I am a warrior of the Ironville clan. I have fought since I was old enough to hold a blade. This is not a risk I take lightly, but it is a risk I am willing to take, because the alternative is losing you and my freedom both to a man who sees me as nothing more than a trophy to be won. Let me do this. Trust my strength as I have trusted your courage." He wanted to argue further, wanted to find some clever solution that did not involve the woman he loved standing across a dueling ground from a mountain of muscle and old iron. But he saw the steel in her gaze, the same fierce determination he had first glimpsed on that auction block weeks ago, and he understood that to deny her, this would be to deny the very thing that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "Then I will be there," Arthur said instead, "every step of the way, and I will carve you something to wear into that fight, something more than the wedding band if you will let me." "The iron band is enough," Lash said, closing her hand over his where it rested against her cheek, the ring cool against his skin. "I will wear nothing else into that circle. Let Voss see exactly what he is fighting against, a woman who chose her own husband and forged her own fate, iron and all." They traveled 2 days through the treacherous mountain pass to reach the gathering ground, a wide natural amphitheater carved by some ancient glacier into the mountainside, ringed by towering stone outcroppings that had clearly served this purpose for generations. Orc warriors from 3 clans had already gathered by the time Arthur and Lash arrived, their hide tents dotting the surrounding slopes, cookfares sending thin trails of smoke into the crisp mountain air, and the atmosphere crackled with the particular tension of a gathering that knew violence was likely before the day was through. The clan elders, 3 ancient orcs whose tusks had yellowed with age, and whose eyes still burned sharp with authority, sat upon a raised platform of stacked stone at the amphitheater's edge, and General Voss stood before them already, flanked by his Asheville warriors, when Arthur and Lash walked into the gathering ground together, her hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture of open, unashamed affection that drew murmurs from the assembled crowd. "So," said the eldest of the 3 council elders, a woman with a voice like grinding stone, "the Ironville daughter arrives, with her human husband at her side. General Voss claims you as spoils of a rightful raid, Lash Strongtusk of the Ironville. What say you to this claim?" Lash stepped forward, releasing Arthur's hand, and stood tall before the council with the same unbroken pride she had shown on the auction block weeks before. "I say the claim is false, Elder. I was taken alive against my will, but I have since freely chosen my own path, my own clan bond broken by no dishonor of my own, and my own husband chosen of my own free will. I invoke the challenge bond, as is my right under the old law, to prove this claim before the council." A ripple of surprise moved through the gathered warriors at the invocation of a custom clearly not used in living memory, and the council elders conferred briefly among themselves before the eldest spoke again. "The challenge bond is an old right, rarely claimed but valid," she said. "General Voss, do you accept the challenge or do you withdraw your claim?" Voss's scarred face split into a grim, confident smile. "I accept," he said, "gladly. Let the girl prove her freedom with steel, since words have failed her thus far." The council cleared the amphitheater floor, warriors from all three clans forming a loose ring around the packed earth at its center, and Arthur found himself pushed to the front of the crowd alongside the clan elders, his heart in his throat as Lash stripped off her outer leather jacket, leaving her in the fitted travel leathers beneath, and stepped into the circle facing General Voss, who hefted his massive warhammer with one hand as though it weighed nothing at all. The fight, when it began, was unlike anything Arthur had ever witnessed. Voss came at her like an avalanche, all brute force and crushing momentum, his warhammer whistling through the air with enough force to shatter stone, and Lash met him not with matched strength, which she did not possess, but with speed and precision honed over years of training, ducking beneath a blow that would have caved in her skull, rolling clear of a downward strike that cratered the earth where she had stood a heartbeat before. Arthur watched, hands clenched into fists so tight his nails cut half-moons into his palms. As the fight wore on, Lash tiring visibly under the relentless assault, a shallow cut opening along her forearm where she had barely deflected a blow with her knife, blood beginning to darken the iron band on her finger where it gripped the hilt. But she was not merely surviving. Arthur realized, watching more closely, that she was studying Voss's rhythm, the slight hitch in his stride when he pivoted for a heavy overhead strike, the fractional pause before he committed to a killing blow, and slowly, patiently, she began to bait him toward exactly those openings, drawing him into overextending, into committing his full weight to strikes that left him exposed. The moment came without warning. Voss, frustrated by his failure to land a decisive blow, roared and swung his warhammer in a wide, powerful arc meant to end the fight in a single stroke, and Lash, rather than dodging clear as she had every time before, stepped inside the arc entirely, close enough that the hammer's head passed harmlessly over her shoulder, and drove her knife hilt deep into the gap in his armor beneath his raised arm. Voss staggered, the warhammer falling from suddenly nerveless fingers, and Lash stepped back, breathing hard, blood-slicked knife still gripped in her hand, as the general sank slowly to his knees before the assembled clans, alive but utterly defeated, his own weapon lying useless in the dirt beside him. The amphitheater erupted into noise, Asheville warriors shouting in fury and disbelief, warriors of the other clans roaring approval at the unexpected upset, and the eldest council elder rose from her seat of stacked stone, raising both hands for silence. "The challenge bond is decided," she declared, her voice carrying over the tumult. Lash Strongtusk of the Ironville has proven her claim by ancient right. Her marriage to the human healer Arthur Weston is recognized before all three clans, binding and unchallengeable. General Voss, you have lost your claim by the very law you invoked. See that your war band respects the ruling, or answer to all three councils together. Voss, still kneeling in the dirt, said nothing, his face a mask of humiliated fury. But even he understood there was no path forward that did not end in his own destruction if he defied a ruling made before three clan councils and witnessed by hundreds. Lash crossed the circle to where Arthur stood, and he caught her as her knees finally buckled with exhaustion and the aftermath of battle fever, lowering her gently to sit on a nearby stone as he immediately began examining the cut on her forearm with trembling hands. "You beat him," Arthur said, his voice thick with a relief so profound it nearly broke him. "You actually beat him. Did you doubt me?" Lash asked, though her voice was weak, breathless, and she leaned into his touch as he cleaned and bound the wound with the same gentle care he had shown her that very first night by the fire, weeks and a lifetime ago. "Not for a moment," Arthur lied, and she laughed, weak and exhausted and utterly alive, and pressed her forehead against his, the iron band on her finger, now flecked with dried blood from the fight, catching the afternoon light. "I told you I would wear nothing else into that circle," she murmured. "The band you made me held, Arthur, iron nails, and it held against a warhammer's owner. I think that is fitting for us." They remained at the gathering ground only long enough for Lash's wounds to be properly tended, and for the council to formally record the ruling in the clan histories. A permanent, unassailable protection against any future claim from the Asheville or any other warband who might think to test the matter again. General Voss withdrew with his remaining warriors before nightfall, his authority among his own warband visibly diminished by the public defeat, and Arthur suspected, though he never learned for certain, that Voss's standing among the Asheville never fully recovered from that humiliation. They returned to the monastery market 4 days later, weary but unburdened for the first time since Arthur had raised his hand at that fateful auction weeks before, and Elder Bram greeted their return with visible relief, the piece of his neutral ground finally secure from the threat that had hung over it. "You have caused me more gray hairs in 2 months than the previous 10 years combined, healer," Elder Bram said, though there was warmth beneath the gruffness. "I trust this is the end of it." "I certainly hope so, Elder," Arthur said, and Lash, standing beside him with her arm looped through his, laughed, a rich, genuine sound that had become as familiar to him now as his own heartbeat. They did not stay at the monastery market much longer after that. With the Asheville threat neutralized, and the clan council's ruling protecting them from any future claim, Arthur and Lash decided together to leave the mountain pass behind and seek a quieter life in the lower valleys, where a healer with a warrior wife might find peaceful work among communities less burdened by the old prejudices of the high passes. They said their farewells to Elder Bram and the market traders who had become unlikely friends over the strange, dramatic months of their courtship, packed Bartholomew the mule with what few possessions they had accumulated, and set out down the winding mountain road together on a crisp autumn morning, the peaks behind them catching the first snow of the season on their highest points. "Where will we go?" Lash asked, walking easily beside him, her hand finding his as it so often did now, an easy, natural gesture between them that still made his heart lift every single time. "Wherever you wish," Arthur said. "I have spent 3 years wandering without a true home. I find I do not much care where we settle so long as you are there with me." "There is a valley," Lash said thoughtfully, 2 weeks south of here, along the river the humans call the Kessa. "My clan traded there sometimes before the wars grew bitter. Good land, good water, far from both Asheville territory and any human kingdom eager to relitigate old grudges. We could build something there. A home, not merely a camp." "That sounds," Arthur said, pulling her hand up to press a kiss against her knuckles, against the iron band that had started as a foolish lie and become the truest thing he had ever made. "Like exactly the kind of home I have been looking for my entire life." They walked on together into the golden autumn light, the mountain road stretching ahead of them toward a future neither the pass law, nor the clan councils, nor General Voss's wounded pride could touch. Two people who had begun as strangers bound by a desperate lie and become, through fire and blood and stolen kisses, and an iron band forged from broken nails, something far stronger and far more real. Partners, equals, and most precious of all to a man who had spent so many lonely years wandering unseen and unclaimed, each other's chosen family, forged not by circumstance but by the deliberate, defiant choice to love and be loved in return. Lash Strongtusk never took the iron band from her finger again, not in the years that followed, not through the ordinary hardships of building a new life in the river valley, not through the occasional flare of old prejudices they still had to face together and overcome side by side, not through anything at all. It remained exactly what Arthur had intended it to be from the moment he first hammered those broken nails into shape by candlelight. A promise that had been tested by warhammers and clan councils and the cruelest edges of a hard world, and had held, unbroken, every single time. And Arthur Weston, the quiet, overlooked herbalist who had once walked mountain roads alone with nothing but a mule and a satchel of dried herbs for company, found that he was overlooked no longer, not by the woman who had chosen him, fought for him, bled beside him, and loved him fiercely and without reservation from that very first charged meeting in a market square to every ordinary, precious morning that followed in their valley home, where the iron band caught the morning light on her hand as she reached for his, again and again, for the rest of their days.